about that event one more time. So, Miley, take it away.
Great. Thanks so much, Ashley. All right. Well, aloha, fellow friends and farmers. Thank you all for joining us tonight. My name is Miley Woodhall, and I'm really excited to spend the next hour with you to kind of walk you through organic certification, what it really means, and how you can kind of adopt and utilize more practices on your farm and business. So, I currently work as the Organic Technical Support Specialist here at HFUU, which is part of a USDA TOPP program. Kind of think of me as your organic, accountability partner. I'm here to keep you from getting lost in the weeds of organic certification, like literally and figuratively. All right, so I thought I would lay the groundwork as far as expectations of what this webinar is going to cover tonight. In a moment here, we're going to do another poll. I thought it'd be fun to kind of do a little bit of myth busters on organics. Then I was going to take a deeper dive into kind of the bigger picture of what organic certification is and why it matters. And then I'm planning on kind of taking a deeper dive into the organic system plans or OSP. And my hope is that from tonight's session, you'll be able to kind of walk away with some actionable items. All right, so without further ado, let's go ahead and pull up my round of our poll questions. And trust me, you guys, there's no pressure here. No one's going to be failing the organic quiz or math quiz tonight. This is just for fun. So let's go ahead and
Yeah.
answer honestly.
Share. Oh, hold on. Okay, there you go.
So just go ahead and take a moment and answer this. And we're going to go through three of them. And then at the end, I'll kind of go through them with you.
Nice. We got some good guesses coming in. So if the question is, did you know that you can only use the USDA organic label if you make more than $5,000 a year in organic sales? We have some folks saying true, some folks saying false, some folks saying not sure. Leave this open for a couple more seconds.
All right, I guess while you guys are answering that, I'll go ahead and go through it with you. So can you use the USDA organic sale if you make over $5,000? And of course, the answer is no, that's false. Operations that make over 5,000 a year, they must be certified organic to use the USDA claim. So that's why a lot of times when you go to the farmers market and we see a lot of these backyard farmers, everyone's claiming organic, that's usually because they would meet those exemptions. So it's really important that if you are going to be labeling your product as organic, you are meeting the requirements within the USDA. All right, fun one. Let's go ahead and get into the next one. So which of these do you think can be certified organic? Crops like coffee, lettuce, livestock like cattle or honey, handling and processing like roasted coffee or making jams and jellies, or wild crops like seaweed or noni. And so far, it looks like we're having some great guesses
Yeah.
with all of the above. All right, while you guys are continuing to answer that, I'll go ahead and give you guys a sneak peek into it, which what can be certified organic, and it is all of the above. Anywhere from seaweed to noni to any processed products, essentially that if they do meet eligibility for certification, it can be certified organic. So great guesses. I think we'll go ahead and roll into the next one. So which of these records do certifiers usually check? Multiple choice. So input, purchases, planning, harvest log, sales records, livestock care, or all of the above. So while you guys are continuing to answer that, I'll go ahead and give you the answer, which it does my heart good to see everybody said all of the above. It feels like I'm doing my job right. As you soon are going to find out, the biggest aspect to certification really has to do with record keeping, and there are several different components that kind of entailed within your activities. So yes, anywhere from purchase receipts to activity logs, that's all part of your record keeping practices. All right. Great job, everyone. Oh, looks like, hold on, I might have just lost you.
We still got you here.
Okay, all right. Go ahead and close this out. And while you're doing that, I'm gonna go ahead and just pull up my PowerPoint here. All right, can you all see that?
Yep, looks great.
All right, thanks. All right, so yeah, as I kind of explained, I was hoping to take a deeper dive into certification tonight to kind of give you some of those trips and tricks and secrets behind certification. Kind of already laid out what you can expect, but here's a brief overview of what I'll be covering. And so, yeah, for those of you that don't know me, again, my name is Miley Woodhall, and I'm the new Organic Technical Support Specialist here at HFUU. Essentially, I have been involved in food, farming, and agriculture for a lifetime. I was born and raised on an award-winning organic specialty crop farm right here in South Kona on the Big Island, and for nearly 2 decades have really dedicated my career to servicing agricultural businesses, primarily with certification compliance, supply chain distribution, and so much more. In addition to my role at HFUU, I also am involved as a realtor, and really, I'm just here to kind of service local families and help farmers with opportunities. So I'm really excited to kind of share my expertise with you guys tonight and really here to support you with your goals and objectives. All right. So I'm just curious, give me a little emoji love in here if you are familiar with the TOPP program, but I thought I'd take a moment to kind of familiar you guys with this program. So essentially TOPP stands for the Transitioning Organic Certification Partnership. This is a federal program through the USDA. There are several regional partners. Ours is CCOF, the California Certified Organic Farmers, which is also a certifier, and we can talk a little bit more about them later. But from there, they have partnerships with different states, operations, and in this case, they're working with Hawaii Farmers Union. So we're incredibly grateful to be a partner through the TOPP program to be able to provide ongoing support for our farmers here in Hawaii. As I shared with you, a large part of my role is to provide touch points and assistance for farmers. So please always keep me in mind as a referral partner and do my best to assist you with your goals and objectives. And then for those of you that are interested in kind of taking this a little bit further and do want to learn more about adopting organic practices or becoming certified organic, we do also offer a mentorship. Right now, that offers a $500 stipend to participate, and then it pairs you with a local mentor, and we provide one-on-one technical support. So if this isn't for you, just always keep it in mind for other, farmers. This is an incredible resource, and like I said, we are so thrilled to be a partner in this. All right, so into the nitty-gritty good stuff. Let's dive into organic certification. While I'm doing that, like I said, maybe drop me a little bit of, or on a scale from 1 to 5, 5 being the lowest and 1 being the highest, go ahead and rate kind of like your knowledge of organic certification. All right, so with that in mind, I think I'll go ahead and get started from the get-go, which essentially the NOP passed the National Organic Program, which is the rules and regulations or the standards that we abide by to adhere into overseeing the, organic rules. That took place in over 2000. From there, it has allowed operations to be able to market their products using the USDA seal. In most cases, being certified organic should bring you a premium for your product. They say it's anywhere between a like 20 to 30% markup. I think that does definitely vary depending on like where your market is based, what your products are, but we are seeing more on a domestic and global scale that there is a lot of value in the organic certification. And then, of course, that all, boils down to customer demographics and demand. I still believe that there is a lot of like trending aspects to organic certification, as well as a lot of interest in still supporting this. I know I recently was just in Costco and there was like a life-size poster bigger than me of the USDA seal. And I was talking to somebody that was visiting over here that just came off the cruise ship that says they only buy organic. So, like I said, it definitely varies, and I always believe in supporting local, but if we can also support the organic movement, it's very important. And I do believe there's a lot of value in the customer aspect of it. So again, that kind of gets down to our values and integrity. So not all farmers are in it for the premium price. A lot of our backyard farmers here truly believe in the values of organic certification and adopting those sustainability practices. So definitely organic certification kind of offers a wide spectrum of options for your farm and business as you're starting to grow and expand in a larger marketplace. All right, so I thought I would kind of just break this down because a lot of times, I know I'm speaking to a lot of farmers here, so of course we know our food and where our food is coming from. But for the larger consumer perspective, a lot of times we're missing all these different key components, these chains of custodies of how this product is being passed through. Now, with the strengthened organic enforcement rule, which we'll talk a little bit more about, all aspects that handle any organic products are required to be certified organic. So whether you're a farmer or processing or transporting or a broker, it's important that you also are maintaining that integrity so that, we're servicing our customers to the best of our ability. All right, the state of organics in Hawaii. So I'm about to age myself here, but when I did get in the industry almost, 2 decades ago, I would say we had over 350 farms that were certified organic. As I shared, that was because organic movement was newer. I think there was a lot more interest in it, but especially because of COVID and in recent years, we've seen a significant decline. So to date, I believe we have just under 117 certified organic operations throughout our state. And although that may be small in numbers, we are mighty in acreage. Surprisingly, with that said, there is over 100,000 acres of certified organic farmland here in Hawaii, which includes, farmers and ranchers. So that part is really exciting. I do feel like we are seeing smaller operations that can adopt these organic practices, but also larger operations that really see the value in these practices. With that said, through the TOPP program, we've been able to assist over 300 acres of operations to adopt organic practices and increasing. All right, so I thought I'd dive into the actual certifiers. So many people don't know that the certifier actually has to be certified through the USDA. So many certification agencies are actually third-party agencies that are accredited. And so it's not actually the USDA that's certifying you. And so these certifiers do vary. There's I think hundreds across the United States as well as like globally. However, there are just a handful of certifiers that do have local inspectors here. So I've kind of just narrowed them down here. So for the most part, as I shared, all these certifiers are just meeting the same regulations and adhering to the rules. But where you do see some differences is internally with their policies, such as with their prices, with their paperwork, and their support. So it's really important that when you are shopping around for a certifier, you're finding one that's going to be the best partner and that's going to, fit for your operation to support your certification needs. All right, so kind of what to expect in the certification process. So the first step would be to develop an organic system plan, which as I shared, we're going to take a little bit deeper dive into that. But once you've completed your application, you then submit that to your chosen certifier. Once they have your application, usually they're going to assign you a client representative that's going to help you through the certification process and review your application for eligibility. Once they get the green light, that goes into inspection. You're going to have a local inspector that comes out, boots on the ground, walking your property, viewing buffers and borders, performing an audit, looking at paperwork, and then they write up a final report. That report gets submitted to the certifier for a final decision. And in most cases, you would have action items or certification conditions that will follow up. This is unlike food safety where it's pass or fail. For the most part, there is some give or take, a bit more lenient in the fact that you can go back and address your conditions. So if there are findings that you need to take care of, such as missing certain aspects of record keeping, you can always go ahead and address them post inspection at the decision point, and then from there they would issue your certificate. With that said, the number one question that I usually get asked is like, how long does it take to get certified? And to that, I would say it really depends on your ability to comply. I've seen operations that have essentially, taken 6 months to a year because they're missing several aspects of record keeping or they weren't able to comply and they've had to jump through more hoops and hurdles. But an average time span is anywhere from 2 to 4 months from the time you submit it to you getting certified. But there is also options with expedited certification. So with that said, I've literally have seen someone get certified within a few weeks. So it really just depends on your needs and ability to comply to the certification process. All right, as we shared with you, there's actually 4 different scopes. As we talked about earlier, there is wildcrafting. We don't really have any certified wildcrafters here in Hawaii and very few domestically. So I just decided to focus on the main 3 ones, which are fairly self-explanatory. Crops would cover any farming operations. Handlers would be anyone that's like slicing, dicing, grading, or altering any products. And then finally, livestock, which of course just has, to do with animals, but it also includes apiary operations or the certification of honey. So as I shared with you, you can literally certify anything as long as it meets eligibility. All right, so a little bit more about SOE, the Strengthening Organic Enforcement. So this rule recently has come into effect in the last year and a half. And up to that point, there really hadn't been any changes in the National Organic Program. There were some gray areas, and what we're finding is a lot of these certifiers were kind of developing their own internal policies and procedures around it. And finally, for the first time, the National Organic Program has come out to really define and to clarify some of these rules to help to streamline these processes. A huge change that we recently have seen is that anybody handling organic products, whether it be a broker or a trader, they would be responsible to be certified organic. We're also seeing stricter rules around import and export. And then the biggest thing that we're seeing is really the enforcement of the traceability and audit records. As I shared with you, record keeping is one of the most important aspects of certification. So just definitely something to keep in mind as you're starting to develop your system plan. And yeah, another big aspect that did come out of SOE was them to enforce the seal and tamper-proof evident packaging. So mainly they just want to make sure there's no potential for commingling. So if you're making any claims with USDA certified organic product, ideally they do want to see it in tamper-proof evidence packaging. Overall, though, like I said, I feel like this really just services our customers and consumers with the highest integrity so that we truly know the products that we're getting are organic. All right. Well, I guess before actually I jump into the cost share, I should talk a little bit about cost because that is one of probably the second number one question that I get in this is how much does it cost to become certified? So as I shared with you, it is going to vary depending on the certifier. They all do have built-in fee schedules. Some of them base it off of your acreage. Other ones look at like your income. Again, it kind of just like depends on the size of your operations and the scopes involved in it. But for a standard farm, 0 to 5 acres, you're looking at anywhere around $1,200 to $1,500 annually. For operations around, excuse me, 10 acres plus, definitely goes up to the $15,000 to $2,000 range. And then if you are process handling, those fees in some cases can double depending on the complexity of your product and like if you're producing a finished product or blending. So several aspects are taken into consideration within the fee schedule. So with that said, we do have the organic cost share program. This is through the USDA Farm Service Agency. So this is a cost share, meaning that once you obtain certification and have paid for it in full, they will reimburse you up to $750 per scope. So again, if you're a crop and handler, you would be eligible for both scopes. And then, just as a reminder, with our TOPP program, we also provide the $500 stipend to participate in that. So I have seen some applicants within their first year be very successful in covering majority of their costs of certification through both this OCCSP as well as TOPP. All right, so I just pulled a couple resources here. Couple things just to keep in mind, reminding you all, if you're not a Hawaii Farmers Union member, please go ahead and sign up. In addition, the TOPP program is here to support you. So just keep us in mind as a referral partner or potentially to be able to work with us through the mentorship program. I plugged a few other resources in here, and if there is information in particular that you would like to see on here, we'd love to hear from you in the comments. And then one more thing worth mentioning is the USDA Organic Integrity Database. So through the changes with SOE, the NOP has recently just redone their integrity database, which is now accessible to anybody. So if you're ever curious if a product is actually certified organic, you can always go in there and look at their status and obtain their certification. This is also a win-win if you're a handler and looking at, sourcing ingredients. You can always go in there and to be able to find suppliers. So that's just this link at the bottom here. Yeah, so here's my contact if you guys do want to reach out about TOPP program, and we can, also share that a little bit more at the end. And I was going to hold off on Q&A at this time, and then we can go ahead and dive into it deeper. But any burning questions while I go ahead and pull up the application to get started on that? All right.
Hi,
So
can you hear?
Oh, you're going audio.
Yes, we should be able to hear you now. I've just allowed everybody to unmute and to unvideo if you would like.
Just
Hop
gonna
on
jump
it.
right in. All right, thank you so much. This is really, really helpful. This is Emily. I just want to check. We are starting out as a hydroponic farm, and we have heard kind of different information about how I think it's controversial, right? Whether hydroponics can be considered organic. Could you speak a little bit on that? Whether the certification process is different?
I
Yeah.
definitely love to speak with you outside of this. I will say that it is possible, and again, it kind of depends on your certifier. A huge aspect would just be as far as like your products and processes that are in place. So that's something that we can, help to evaluate and help to guide you through that. There are a lot of, options around that, so it's definitely worth, discussing at a later
Okay, great. I will reach out to you over email. Thank you.
date. So I'm just trying to pull up the application for some reason. Doesn't seem to want to allow me to do that. Here we go. I had to refresh it. Got it.
Looks good.
Okay, perfect. All right. So as promised, here is a copy of the organic system plan. So this is the main application for certification. As I shared with you, every certifier's application is a little bit different. I chose this one just because it's very straightforward and well laid out for the purpose of, today's presentation. Some certifiers do have whole sections for each of these questions. And, the process can look a little bit different, but for the most part, they all are, abiding again to the USDA NOP regulations. So the first step would be to determine eligibility. So in order to become certified organic, you can't use any prohibited materials for 3 years or 36 months. I know many people think that in order to become certified organic, you then have to do some sort of testing or, some state officials coming out, but it's not quite that daunting. Essentially, you would just be vouching for your operation and filling out your site history affidavit. If you didn't previously own the farm and it was under other management or other ownership, it is possible that you could go back and have them sign off on those affidavits to meet eligibility. But of course, if you're unable to obtain that, then you would then have to kind of start from scratch of when you did obtain the farm. So just making sure that, again, no prohibited materials had been used on the farm for 3 years or 36 months. And that's usually where I start with any new applicant, is to make sure they're eligible depending on, their past history of their farm. Once we have that in place, then I go ahead and dive into the system plan. And so, of course, it's pretty straightforward as far as like what your name is and business. The certifiers are now requiring that new applicants are actual legal entities. So you would be required to be registered, either as like an LLC or as a sole proprietor, but you would have to hold legal ownership of the operation and to be able to demonstrate that. Next would be to provide a brief, description. Again, that's pretty straightforward, but this is really helpful for the certifier for you to really share all aspects of your operation so that we get a bigger picture. For somebody that sits behind the desk and that's reading these applications, it's hard just to look at these check marks and to understand what's happening internally. So the more you can share, the better. All right, next would have to do if you are doing any export. There is equivalency to several different countries. So depending where you are exporting, there are additional requirements. I'm not going to go too deep into this. This could be a whole discussion in itself. But if you are interested or looking at doing organic export, we definitely can always talk. Next would be state and local registration. This primarily has to do with California. We are exempt here in Hawaii. There are no additional certifications that you have to obtain. Obviously, there's like food safety certification for good handling practices with GMP. But that's kind of a different discussion. But on the farm level, usually there's no additional certification that you would need to obtain in order to apply for organic certification. Next is just to make sure that you're including your address. I know here in Hawaii, on the Big Island in particular, it can be tricky. Some of these guys have like TMK numbers. There's not always addresses, but if you can at least pull, like I said, some sort of county documentation on that or a way that we can actually verify the actual site, it's really helpful if you don't actually have an address. And then we did just talk about the different types of certification, which for the most part, all of these would fall under the crop scope. And again, here you can see we do certify, this certifier does certify hydroponics. So that is an option as well as, different types of growing methods here. Next would be to include your crop list. You can, list anywhere from one crop to I've seen hundreds of crops listed. It's completely up to you. Just something to keep in mind, though, is that we do require you to kind of keep records for all your crops that are listed for certification. So if you are going to have 100 different crops listed, you are going to have 100 more pieces of paper and record keeping that you're having to maintain. So usually I say that usually just list the crops you're actually getting value or being able to sell as a cash crop to market. And then you can always add or remove products throughout the year. Certifiers do not, most certifiers do not, charge you per crop listed on your product list. All right, next would be to review split and parallel operations. So believe it or not, you can actually have a parallel operation or split, meaning that you can produce non-organic crops or products, parallel next to your organic products. So for example, you may have a coffee farm that's certified organic, but you also produce, avocados that are conventional. So in that case, you would be split. And then if you did have, say, both avocados side by side, organic and conventional, that would fall under the parallel scope. So it is possible to have both, organic and non-organic operations. It's just we want to make sure we're verifying, the use of materials on both sides of it. And again, that's something we can kind of take a deeper dive with. But I've also seen operations where, like, maybe just like around their handling facility or their residential home, they do choose to use certain herbicides. Again, that would fall under split certification, but that is possible to do where you don't have to have, complete your entire operation certified. With that said, I know the number one question usually is, so what is the buffer and border zone for that? So according to the NOP, there is no actual distance in place. General rule of thumb is around 50 feet, but that will vary depending on, the terrain of the operation. If you are being bordered by conventional operations, in that case, it would be really important for your inspector to come out to view your property, to walk buffers and borders, to verify that they're sufficient. But if you did have that in that case where it didn't quite meet it, you could have what they call a buffer zone, which would be designating maybe the first or second row of your crop or operation as a non-organic crop. So you would be responsible for selling it as non-organic. And then, of course, just maintaining, organic practices within the grove itself. All right, so next has to do with fertility and inputs. Now, I know so many of our Hawaii farmers are like, yes, I'm organic out of neglect, but it is important that through this process, you do develop, an organic system plan that will build your organic matter. And then you have to make sure that any inputs that you're using are third-party certified. So that would be through OMRI or WSDA and CCOF. So we can always provide you information on how to obtain, certified approved materials within your operation. But a big part of, in addition to this application, would be also filling out your material list for all the inputs that you're planning on using to verify compliance. Next has to do with compost. Yes, so if you want to be using any raw compost on your operations, you do have to meet the 90-day rule, meaning for orchard crops, meaning that from the time of application to harvest that no manure has been applied. And then for leafy crop greens, it would be 120 days. So the 90-20 day rule would also apply for any livestock that you are utilizing within your operation, that you do have to rotate them out of the fields. Primarily, that does have to do with food safety concerns. For those that are actually making compost and heating them to temperature, it is acceptable as long as you are meeting our requirements to make sure you're turning it and keeping temperature logs. And then again, just making sure you meet certain application periods. So it is possible, but just a little bit of additional, record keeping and steps involved in maintaining compost regulations. All right. So next would have to do with pest control. So kind of prior to using any pest control, you are required to establish preventative methods. I think for the most part, everyone is already meeting this. For, a lot of times when I'm walking the fields, you'll see that, they're companion planting or they have well-established ground cover, proper buffers and borders, like minimal use of inputs. And so those are all contributing to preventative practices in place. So you'd want to first identify what those practices are prior to resorting to the use of any approved inputs. So same as the fertilizer, you do have to just make sure that your pesticides are approved by a third party, and then have those on your material list for review. And then that's the same for any disease control, just making sure you have preventative practices prior to resorting to any fungicides. All right, next is weed control, which I know everyone's laughing because if you're an organic farmer, that's basically your life is ongoing weed control. But believe it or not, there are actually some approved herbicides out there that you can use. I'll say in my experience, I haven't really found any that are very effective for a lot of, the weeds that we have here in Hawaii, especially like elephant grass or guinea grass is really hard to control. But with that in mind, you can use mulch and weed cloth. As far as weed cloth goes, you just want to make sure that you are rotating that every couple of years and documenting it. The worst thing we want to see is coming out there and you have, shredded plastic and weed cloth all over your operation. But with that said, I do feel like that is a pretty effective, method in controlling weeds, especially with smaller operations. So that can be helpful. And then as far as weed control, of course, as we shared, livestock would be acceptable as long as you're rotating them within the fields. I'm just going to take a little sip before we get into the fun stuff of seeds. All right, so as far as seeds, many people think that you have to use all organic seeds, and that is not the case. You can use non-organic seeds if you are able to document that you were not able to find them in the form, quality, or quantity. So if you are looking for a certain variety of seeds, but you can't find the quantity that you need, you would be able to reach out to 3 different sources of suppliers and document that to show that you've attempted to buy organic seeds, and then you can resort to the use of non-organic seeds. One thing just to keep in mind with non-organic seeds is just they can't be treated and non-GMO. So that would be the same for any cover crop seeds. And for the most part, a lot of our local seed suppliers and, domestically that we work with, they're very familiar with organic practices and they have no problem, providing you with a seed verification letter. And then essentially that would be the same for any planting stock. You do have to attempt to buy organic stock, and if you're unable to find it, you can source non-organic stock, but you do have to maintain it as organic for 1 year prior to harvest, which many of us know most of these fruit trees aren't, producing fruit within a year anyways. Next has to do with crop rotation, which is a very important aspect of, certification. They do just want to make sure that you are continually rotating your fields and then properly documenting that. So that would entail, your harvest and planting in rotation. Next has to do with irrigation. So for the most part, the NOP kind of left out water and irrigation. So again, it kind of is more of internal processes. So if you do use well water, the certifier may request water testing. But if you're using any, potable source of water, for the most part, it is acceptable and there's no additional, requirements there. And that also falls, here in Hawaii, we have a lot of catchment. So as long as you're not actually treating your water, for the most part, minimal documentation is used, but it is important just to write down what your practices are here. Some people do use, fertigation injectors and other like overhead methods. So again, just making sure you're listing them. Next would have to do with equipment and cleaning. So if you are a, all organic operation, you are not required necessarily to keep any cleaning logs, but of course, always keeping your equipment in good working shape. However, if you are a split or parallel operation, you would be required to keep a cleaning log. So if you're going back and forth between organic and non-organic and utilizing equipment or bringing in contractors that do that, you do have to clean out your equipment and document that. Next has to do with harvest. Pretty straightforward here, just making sure that you're documenting your activities, and then same thing for any like harvest containers or, knives or sickles, stuff like that. If it's going back and forth, just making sure that it's well maintained and cleaned. Next is post-harvest handling. So the crop scope does cover basic post-harvest handling. So if you are bringing your product, in-house, maybe washing it, making salad mix, different things like that, you would be able to list that under post-harvest handling. They also would include like coffee production, so taking it through the wet mill to like a parchment stage would fall under this scope. So Yeah, it kind of depends on what you're doing, but for the most part, for simple post-harvest handling activities, it's going to fall within their under the crop scope, and there shouldn't be any additional fees for that. So just being kind of mindful of that. Next has to do with storage. So again, a big part with the SOE is that we really like to see any operations that are certified organic, that all their products are properly labeled, their storage facilities stayed organic, just so it's very clear that if anybody walks in there, they know that those are organic products. So for storage, you could again handle both organic and non-organic in a parallel situation, but again, just making sure that products are properly sealed and everything's properly labeled. Next has to do with transportation. So same thing, all your products at transportation, you could do parallel transport, but just making sure that everything is properly sealed and labeled. And then next, if you are utilizing any contractors for any aspects of your operation, maybe they help with assisting with spraying or they're there for transport or harvest, it's really important to obtain a memorandum of understanding or some sort of notification agreement just to make sure that you're protecting yourself in the event that if there were any issues, just making sure you can hold them accountable. And that also has a lot to do with like sharing equipment, that if they're bringing in outside equipment and responsible for, keeping cleaning logs, that you do have proper documentation of what those agreements look like. Next has to do with labeling. And as we've all found out earlier, it is, you are required to be certified organic in order to use the USDA seal. There are some regulations around that, but for the most part, using the USDA seal is optional. However, always encouraged. I tell everyone you're paying for this process, you might as well be utilizing it. But with that in mind, if you do choose to use the USDA label, there are some internal requirements. Essentially, you do have to just make sure you're identifying your product as organic. So for example, organic lettuce, organic coffee, mentioning who your certifier is. So saying certified organic by, and then your certifier's name. And then lastly, the USDA seal. Again, it is optional to use that, but if you do choose to use it, you can only use it in two different variations. One's in black and white. The other one is in their green and brown, which you're probably familiar with. But unfortunately, you can't do like pink or purple or like any other fun colors on that. All right, so the fun part, as I shared with you, one of the most important aspects in certification has to do with record keeping. So another quick like myth debuster is that you don't have to have your records from all these past years in order to apply. But if you are applying for certification, you do have to develop your plan of what you're going to be doing. And once you get certified, you are responsible to keep those records. And so records would entail anywhere from field activities to inputs to, again, the seed verification, use of manure, pest control, you name it. So through the TOPP program, we have developed some Excel spreadsheets that you can always refer to. There are some other great resources out there with ATRA in addition to like CCOF. So if you're interested in learning more about like what the record keeping requirements are, we can always provide that information for you. So at this point, usually your inspector would come out and they would do your internal audit. So they would be looking at your records. So just to kind of, give you a brief overview of what to expect there, they would do a two-part audit. The first part would be to select one product to do a traceability on. So essentially, we want to track it from seeds to sales. And you can always do internal mock audits too within your operation to prepare. But I always like to start with the sales invoice and kind of work backwards in the chain of custody. So from a sales voice, looking at maybe a bill of lading, transportation, the handlers, the brokers, all the way down to, the harvest or whatever aspect you would be responsible for within your operation, but just making sure that you do have lot numbers or numbers that are connecting each dot or the next process in place. And again, that's been a big part about SOE. Their requirements is just making sure that all the dots are connecting. As far as traceability audits, I feel like I could almost spend maybe an hour talking about that kind of stuff. But if you want to learn more, definitely here to help you and happy to help you, set up some sort of lot system to help you be successful in the traceability aspects. The second part would be a mass balance audit. So looking at total production for a selected period. Again, this is going to depend on the inspector's choice. For the most part, for smaller operations or single crops, I usually like to do a year's audit. So looking at total production that came off of, which acreage. But again, this may vary. It is possible that you could do a smaller portion. Sometimes I'll do anywhere between like 3 to 6 months. And I may choose multiple products to do the mass balance audit. So it is really important, again, to just making sure that you're tracking your yields and exactly where those products are coming from so that it can ease in the audit trail. All right, yeah. So as I shared with you, it's important that you're developing your material list of inputs that you're planning on using. So a lot of times people say, oh, I haven't used anything for years. It's important that you are building up your organic matter within your operation and you do have your list of approved inputs. Again, this would require a third-party review from those very, different, organizations such as OMRI, WSDA, or CCOF, but we can always help you to develop your input plan. And this can also, overlap a bit with like your soil test and taking those into consideration. One thing that I didn't mention is that you are not required to do a soil test unless you're using micronutrients. So if you are finding deficiencies within your operation, you do want to maintain that as part of that aspect. And that, for the most part, will cover a lot of these restrictions that are listed here, but something we can always cover later on. And then in this particular case, the certifier has a whole separate application if you are split parallel, just because they do want to have a better understanding of, what exactly that entails. But with that in mind, I think I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up and to make sure we have enough time for Q&A. So yeah, without further ado, I guess I'll go ahead and open up the floor for questions.